Hey everyone, I am wearing my Liverpool jersey today because they play in a final later and I need to bring them good luck. So yes, if they win this final, it's all because of me. And if they don't, I might have to record this video again because right now I'm sounding very confident. But this is how confident I am in you and your ability to pass this AP test, especially since you opened this video and you're watching. Okay, let's get to it. Today we're going to talk about Westward Expansion. And when we say Westward Expansion, most of us immediately think about the idea of manifest destiny, but the United States was expanding way before that time period, which manifest destiny begins around 1844. If you remember, in 1803, during Jefferson's presidency, he buys the Louisiana Purchase, which doubles the size of the United States. And in 1819, the U.S. gains land in Florida from Spain due to the Adams-Onis Treaty. And in 1842, the United States was still having minor issues with Great Britain, especially up north in the disputed territory between Maine and current-day Canada, which was still a colony at this time. Some Americans wanted to go to war with the British, again, but Daniel Webster and the British negotiator Lord Ashburton came to an agreement which gave the United States an additional 7,000 square miles in Maine. But this was a small amount of land compared to the land that was gained in Texas. Mexico at the time had gained independence from Spain, and so they occupied and owned this territory. But they needed people to populate this land. So they came to an agreement with Stephen Austin, who was an American, and Stephen Austin was allowed to move families onto this tract of land that was given to him as long as they were Catholic, so the same faith as most Mexicans, and became proper Mexican citizens. Well, those two things did not happen. More Americans who desperately wanted more property began to move to this territory, and they never got rid of their Americanness. In fact, many people who moved to Texas at the time were rough or criminals or about to be criminals. Some of them skipped town right before a sheriff was about to arrest them. Actually, the saying "gone to Texas" or GTT became slang at that time, meaning they skipped town because they were wanted. So these Americans weren't exactly the type you could easily push around, and by 1835 there were about 30,000 Americans living in Texas. Well, the Mexican government and the Americans living in Mexico's territory had a lot of disagreements, like the issue of slavery, which Mexico had already made illegal, but Americans kept moving to Texas with their slaves. So in 1835, after things escalated, Santa Anna took away their state's rights and sent in the army to stop the Texans. Right after that, Sam Houston and the other Texans declared their independence and called themselves the Lone Star State. There are a few battles and a few where Americans were slaughtered, like the Battle of the Alamo, where famous heroes like Davy Crockett die. But later the Texans are able to win against the odds and force a surrender from Santa Anna, gaining the territory in Texas. All of this will be widely disputed by Mexico. And Texans want to immediately join in America as the next state, but Northerners fight against it because they don't want slavery to extend. So it isn't until 1845, right at the end of Tyler's term as president, that Texas becomes a state. In the middle of all of this discussion on extending statehood to Texas, the election of 1844 occurs, and Texas became a huge issue in this election. Henry Clay runs. Again, he really wanted to be president as the Whig candidate, and he loses again. This time he loses to James K. Polk, who runs as the Democratic candidate. If you remember in a previous video on Jackson, I did a short comparison about Polk and Jackson. Polk was considered young Hickory and Jackson old Hickory. Other than the Texas annexation, the idea of manifest destiny also became a big part of this election. Manifest destiny is the belief that God has destined Americans to move west and bring their ideas of democracy with them. Polk also campaigned for taking all of the Oregon Territory, which was being argued over with the British settlers who were also living there. The slogan 5440 or fight means taking all of the Oregon Territory, and it became his election and rallying cry. Well, Polk wins the election, and this makes Tyler believe the people are supportive of expansion, so he immediately annexes Texas or adds it as the next state at the end of his term, even before Polk arrives to become president himself. From here, expansion just continues. During Polk's presidency, Britain agrees to give Oregon to the United States, but not all of it, so the whole 54-40 or fight thing wasn't really true, but the U.S. does gain a lot of the Oregon territory. Also, during Polk's presidency, we go to war with Mexico, where we gain a lot of land called the Mexican Cession, meaning the land that Mexico gave up after the war. Mexico is still unhappy with the United States over the whole Texas thing, and both countries disagree on the boundary of Texas. Also, Polk wants the land in California, which is also owned by Mexico. So Polk sends a guy named John Slidell to Mexico to offer to pay $5 million for New Mexico and $25 million for California. But Mexicans refuse to even meet with him, finding this super insulting. So Polk does, the next reasonable thing in a negotiation and sends in his troops to that disputed territory on the border of Texas. Makes perfect sense, right? Basically, he wanted to start a war, but wanted to make it look like Mexico started it. So when Mexico attacked, he told Congress that he had tried everything to avoid war, but it was too late. Abraham Lincoln actually spoke out against this war, saying they needed to know the exact spot where the attack occurred before going to war. This is called the spot resolutions. But pretty much everyone was on board, and so the U.S. went to war with Mexico. At the end of the war, the United States gained a ton of land that you can see in this map here. The U.S. also agreed to pay $15 million for New Mexico and California. The Texas border was moved further down to where the U.S. wanted at the Rio Grande, and the U.S. paid claims they had previously owed Mexico of $3.5 million. All this land is going to cause major issues between the North and the South, but we'll get into that in another video. Some people had argued against this treaty, though. There were some greedy Southerners who wanted more. They wanted all of Mexico, although people like Calhoun and Polk were against this idea, and many Northerners were against the idea of taking all of Mexico because they were anti-slavery and didn't want to add more slavery states to the Union. So the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is approved. Later, as the U.S. was trying to find the best place to put railroad lines to reach their new territory in California, they realized that the best place was actually land just outside of New Mexico, but was on Mexico's side of the border. Mexico was in need of money at the time, though, so in 1853, they agreed to give this land called the Gadsden Purchase, named after the guy who went to negotiate with Mexico, and it would cost the United States $10 million. But this isn't the end of Southerners' desire to gain more land to extend slavery. In the 1850s, they attempted to take Nicaragua and wanted Panama and Cuba. In 1854, the U.S. government secretly set up a document that said they would offer $120 million to Spain for Cuba, and if they refused, then they would go to war. But this document, called the Austin Manifesto, was leaked to the public, and people in the North who were against slavery were outraged. Pierce, who was now president, was having so many problems and had to get rid of this idea very quickly. And because he does get rid of the Austin Manifesto, the idea of expansion stopped. Well, it stopped at least until the time of imperialism, which we will discuss in Unit 7. If they could have agreed on the issue of slavery, the U.S. probably would have continued to take more land at this time. Okay, your practice question this time is from the 2023 exam, and it is evaluate the extent to which the changes in United States foreign policy contributed to territorial growth from 1840 to 1898. So there's a lot of examples for that prompt in this video, including things you can use as your context. Take a few minutes, think about what your context would be, think about your thesis, and then what evidence you would use. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and go Liverpool.